In 1625, an Italian nobleman named Pietro della Valle embarked on a remarkable journey through the Middle East. Known for his extensive travels across Asia, North Africa, and India, della Valle had even married an Assyrian Christian princess in Damascus. Together, they explored the Middle Eastern landscapes on horseback and camel, guided by locals. Traveling through the Middle East at this time was perilous due to the ongoing war between the Ottoman and Persian empires over Baghdad. Bandits and wild lions posed additional threats, keeping della Valle's guides on high alert. On June 18, 1625, the group spotted a suspicious group of tribesmen on the horizon. Seeking refuge, they found shelter among enormous ruins, which della Valle later described in his memoirs. Being suspicious of some Arabian vagrants or vagabonds, for more security we moved a mile further and took up our station under a little hill near some ruins of buildings which we saw from afar. The group stayed in the ruins for several nights while negotiating with the local ruler for safe passage. During the day, della Valle explored the monumental ruins under the scorching Iraqi sun. He noted, "Our removal, hence being still deferred, I went in the forenoon to take a more diligent view of the ruins of the above-said ancient building." Della Valle was intrigued by the high-quality bricks, many stamped with ancient, unknown letters. He observed they had been cemented together, not with lime, but with bitumen or pitch. Fascinated, he meticulously recorded some of the symbols found on the stones and clay bricks. Amongst the ruins, he also discovered pieces of black marble engraved with the same letters. He wrote, "Surveying the ruins again, I found on the ground some pieces of black marble, hard and fine, engraven with the same letters as the bricks, which seemed to me to be a kind of seal. Amongst other symbols which I discovered in that short time, two I found in many places. One was like a pyramid, and the other resembled a star of 8 points. Unbeknownst to della Valle, he had stumbled upon the ruins of Ur, a city central to one of the world's earliest civilizations, Sumer. However, negotiations with the local leader eventually failed, and della Valle's guides decided it was no longer safe to remain. They fled under the cover of night, escaping across the desert. Among della Valle's possessions were a few clay tablets he had found at the ruins of Ur. These tablets became the first examples of Sumerian writing ever seen in Europe. Throughout their journey home, della Valle must have been fascinated by the mysterious ancient symbols on those tablets, intrigued by the secrets of a long-forgotten civilization. As early farming communities grew, they began to band together into larger settlements to divide the labor of farming and to protect their grain stores from potential thieves. These early settlers learned to shape clay into pots for storage, but were initially limited to regions with plentiful rainfall, such as the mountains and foothills. From around 6,500 BC, human settlements began to spread. Over centuries and millennia, these communities gradually worked their way down the courses of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, reaching the inhospitable lands of southern Iraq. The identities, languages, and self-designations of these early settlers remain unknown. Today, this period of several thousand years is known as the Ubaid period, named arbitrarily after the site where their first artifacts were discovered. As the Ubaid people moved down the rivers of Iraq, they made several crucial discoveries. They noticed that date palms grew in some areas along the river, providing a rich and delicious source of calories. They soon learned to cultivate these palms in orchards. Moreover, they realized that date palms could provide shade for other more delicate plants, enabling them to grow under the harsh Iraqi sun. Another groundbreaking discovery was their realization that crops didn't have to be grown solely on the riverbanks. With effort, they could dig channels to divert water inland, allowing them to grow crops almost anywhere, provided they could dig a canal long enough. The people of this region soon became adept at digging canals. Properly managed, this landscape became immensely productive. In their fields, they grew wheat, millet, and sesame. In gardens shaded by date palms, they cultivated pomegranates, grapes, figs, chickpeas, lentils, leeks, garlic, cucumbers, and watercress. In the midst of this arid desert, there was a noticeable patch of green. In southern Iraq, the Tigris and Euphrates rivers branched into deltas and shallow lakes before meeting the ocean, creating an ancient marsh landscape. Dense thickets of reeds grew here, tall enough to obscure the view. This marshland was populated by buffalo, wild boar, and marshland birds. Since ancient times, people in this area have built houses out of reeds, binding them into strong beams up to a meter thick, and constructing large, vaulted houses entirely from reeds. It was in this marshy, southern landscape that the greatest Sumerian cities arose. Just as Mesopotamia was watered by two great rivers, its lands were populated by two great peoples, the Sumerians and the Acadians. Over the course of history, the Sumerians and Acadians developed a symbiotic relationship, making it impossible to tell the story of one without the other. We know a fair amount about the Acadians in the north. They spoke a Semitic language, part of the same family as Aramaic, Hebrew, and Arabic. This language seems to have been indigenous to the region, sharing grammar and vocabulary with many neighboring languages. The Sumerians, however, remain much more mysterious. Their language, a language isolate, has no known relatives or connections to any surrounding languages. This linguistic isolation has puzzled archaeologists and linguists, leading to what is known as the Sumerian problem. Early scholars, upon discovering Sumerian texts, doubted that it could be a real language, speculating that it might have been a code for secret communication. This unique language has led some historians to wonder whether the Sumerians might have arrived in southern Iraq from elsewhere. The Sumerians' mysterious origins have fueled speculation among historians and archaeologists. Their language, unrelated to any known language families, suggests a unique cultural and historical background. The possibility that the Sumerians arrived in southern Iraq from another region remains an intriguing question. If they did migrate, where did they come from, and what drove them to settle in the fertile plains of Mesopotamia? The Sumerians' impact on human civilization is undeniable. They pioneered innovations in writing, mathematics, and urban planning. Their society laid the groundwork for future civilizations, and their cultural and technological achievements continue to influence us today. The story of the Sumerians is not just about their rise and fall, but also about the enduring legacy they left behind. In the next segments, we will delve deeper into the daily lives of the Sumerians, their religious beliefs, and the eventual collapse of their civilization. We will explore how this remarkable society managed to thrive in such a challenging environment and what lessons their story holds for us today. The Sumerian culture, centered on the southern coast of Iraq, has prompted speculation that they might have arrived by boat. This theory is supported by an ancient Babylonian legend recorded by the Roman historian Flavius Josephus in the 1st century AD. The legend tells of Oannes, a half-man, half-fish figure who emerged from the sea to teach the Mesopotamians the secrets of culture. Oannes brought knowledge of letters, sciences, and various techniques. He instructed them on city founding, temple building, law creation, and land measurement. He also taught them agriculture and fruit gathering before returning to the sea. This myth might preserve an ancient memory of the Sumerians arriving en masse by boat, bringing advanced urban culture. Some have even suggested that the Sumerians might have come from as far as India. Supporting the migration theory, some evidence comes from the words used for professions. For common manual labor jobs, the Sumerians used pre-Sumerian words. However, for sophisticated and urban occupations, they used distinctly Sumerian words, such as those for scribe and winemaker. Another intriguing, albeit far-fetched theory proposes that the origins of the Sumerians are tied to a cataclysmic flood event. This theory stems from Sumerian mythology, which features a great flood that washed over the world in the distant past. This story later passed into Babylonian legend and was incorporated into the Hebrew Bible. The flood story is one of the oldest continuously told stories and may offer clues about the Sumerians' origins. Historians have speculated about the historical events that could have inspired the flood story. At the end of the last ice age, around 10,000 BC, global temperatures rose significantly over about 5,000 years, causing vast ice sheets to melt and sea levels to rise dramatically. This melting led to significant inundations worldwide. The land bridge between Russia and Alaska submerged, separating Asia and the Americas. Low-lying regions of Europe's North Sea flooded, turning Great Britain into an island. In the Middle East, the effects were equally dramatic. During the Ice Age, the Tigris and Euphrates rivers flowed an additional 600 kilometers, joining into a single river along a low-lying valley between present-day Iran and Saudi Arabia. This grand river would have met the Indian Ocean around the region of modern-day Dubai. Some historians argue that Neolithic humans may have settled in this fertile valley, descending from the mountains of Iran. In the upcoming sections, we will delve deeper into the daily lives of the Sumerians, their religious beliefs, and their technological advancements. We will examine how their society was structured and how they managed to build and sustain some of the earliest cities known to humanity. Through this exploration, we aim to shed light on the remarkable achievements of the Sumerians and the factors that led to their eventual decline. The story of the Sumerians is not just a tale of ancient history, but a reflection of human innovation and resilience. By understanding their journey, we gain valuable insights into the foundations of our own civilization and the enduring legacy of one of humanity's first great cultures. As the glaciers melted, the sea advanced slowly but steadily, averaging a rate of 120 meters a year over 5,000 years. This translates to over a kilometer every 10 years, or 1 meter every 3 days. If humans inhabited this low-lying region during this period, the experience would have been utterly terrifying. Over centuries, these people would have been driven north by the encroaching waves that swallowed forests and villages. They would have been forced into denser populations, adapting constantly as they moved. This roving band of refugees could never settle for long before the sea advanced further. This exodus likely continued until around 5000 BC, when the planet's temperature stabilized and the seacoast reached its furthest point. This coincides with the emergence of Sumerian culture. The theory posits that as Semitic-speaking farmers moved down the rivers from the northern mountains, they encountered another population coming up from the south. This southern population was a ravaged people speaking a language that had evolved independently and telling tales of a flood that drowned the whole world. This theory may find support in the legend of Oannes, the amphibious fishman who emerged from the sea to teach Mesopotamians. Perhaps the Sumerians came to southern Iraq not by boat, but by walking out of a land now submerged under the sea. Another relevant legend is the myth of Enki and Ninhursag, which describes the god Enki creating man in Dilmun, an earthly paradise akin to the Garden of Eden. Dilmun, thought to be modern-day Bahrain, was once part of a fertile river valley now submerged under the Persian Gulf. While this theory remains speculative without further evidence, it offers a colorful and intriguing explanation. It highlights that history is a continuing process of inquiry and debate rather than a rigid set of dates and facts. Attempting to uncover the truth of such a distant past can feel like mapping the surface of another planet or exploring the deep sea's dark depths with only small spots of historical light to guide us. Despite the mysteries surrounding their origins, much is known about the Sumerians. They referred to themselves as Ugsagigga, or the black-headed people, a term echoed by the Acadians, who called them Salmat Kakadi. Carvings depict Sumerians with curly hair on top and short sides. Common men wore sheepskin kilts, while wealthier individuals wore colored wool fabrics adorned with tassels and beads. Both wealthy men and women wore jewelry made of copper and sometimes gold, including anklets, bracelets, necklaces, and ear ornaments. Remarkably, significant evidence about Sumerian music has been discovered. The Sumerians wrote their music on clay tablets, and other texts explain how to play and tune the instruments. Today, we can hear the music that once played in the temples and courtyards of cities like Eridu, Ur, and Uruk. This musical legacy, along with their advancements in writing, mathematics, and urban planning, underscores the Sumerians' profound influence on subsequent civilizations. Their story continues to captivate and inspire, offering a glimpse into one of humanity's earliest and most remarkable cultures. The Semitic Akkadians and the Sumerians formed a symbiotic relationship over centuries, sharing their successes, advances, and failures, much like their parallel rivers. Their fates became inextricably linked. The Sumerians believed that the world was a roughly circular landmass surrounded by a huge body of water, and that another ocean lay above, held by the sky's solid structure, occasionally letting water through as rain. They distinguished between sweet water, rain, and rivers, and bitter water, the sea. The Sumerians called their homeland Ki-Engi, meaning the land of the noble lords. They described their settled societies as Kalam, civilized, and the mountainous zones as Kur, mountain, which also came to mean rebellious, barbarous, and wild. This reflects their view of the surrounding regions, the vast desert of Arabia to the south and west, the rocky Taurus Mountains to the north, and the Zagros Mountains to the east. The sense of isolation is still reflected in the Arabic term Al Jazeera, meaning the island, for Upper Mesopotamia. Despite the challenging landscape, the Sumerians thrived. Without stone, they made bricks from river mud, straw, gravel, and broken pottery, and baked them. They crafted everything from pots to sickles and writing tablets out of clay. They harvested reeds to make bundles and mats. The Sumerians invented or adopted the pottery wheel, the wagon wheel, the plow, and the sailboat. They built complex arches and domes and learned to cast metals like copper and later bronze. The Sumerians were avid mathematicians. They developed complex measurement systems, methods for dividing, multiplying, and calculating angles, and even wrote the first multiplication tables on clay tablets. Their influence extends to modern times with their division of time into minutes and seconds, stemming from their base 60 number system. This system was practical, rooted in the human hand's design. They used the thumb to count 12 segments on the fingers, then raised a finger on the other hand for each 12, reaching 60 before starting again. The 12 lunar cycles per year reinforced this system, which they believed was divinely intended. The concept of 360 degrees in angle measurement is another lasting legacy of the Sumerian base 60 system. This ingenuity allowed Sumerian society to grow steadily. They dug vast networks of irrigation canals, extending the agricultural zone and enabling transportation of goods. They built dams to regulate river flows and control spring floods. The Sumerian language has a vast array of terms for different kinds of canals, reservoirs, dams, and lock gates necessary for water control. This transformed southern Iraq's landscape from dusty salt flats and marshy swamps to a green patchwork of farmland. Historians argue that the construction of canals and watercourses led to greater social organization during the Sumerian period. These extensive water management systems required careful planning, engineering expertise, and mathematical calculations. Organizing work teams, paying them in food and beer, and appointing foremen and overseers led to early bureaucracy and the rise of the first true states. In the 1930s, historian Arnold Toynbee argued that the environmental challenges in southern Iraq created conditions for civilization. The desiccation of the region drove the early Sumerians to transform the lower Tigris and Euphrates Valley. Sumerian legend commemorates this struggle through the myth of the god Marduk slaying the dragon Tiamat and creating the world from her remains, symbolizing the subjugation of the primeval wilderness and the creation of the land through canalization and soil draining. Toynbee's stimulus and response effect theory posits that environments like southern Iraq, where challenges are numerous but not overwhelming, foster civilization. In too comfortable conditions, there's little need for increased social organization or technological development, while in too harsh conditions, society cannot develop. According to Sumerian texts, Eridu was the first city in the region. The controversial Sumerian king list describes Eridu as the place where the god Enki decided that kingship should rule, stating, "When kingship from heaven was lowered, the kingship was in Eridu." The list claims Elulim ruled for 28,800 years and Alangar for 36,000 years. While many historians question the reliability of this source, seeing it as potential fiction or propaganda, it provides insight into how the Sumerians viewed their history. Many argue that Eridu, founded around 5,400 BC, may well have been the world's first city. Around 5,400 BC, the first Sumerian city, Eridu, was founded amidst a landscape that still saw woolly mammoths in remote parts of the world. Soon, Eridu became one of many small cities in southern Iraq. These independent city-states, centered around temples and ruled by priest-kings known as Ensi, often had councils of elders, including both men and women. Most of these cities had populations of no more than 10,000 people, with borders defined by canals and boundary stones. As the Sumerian cities developed, they began to surpass the older Ubaid culture in art, architecture, and technology. This early period was marked by relative peace, with little evidence of organized warfare or professional soldiers, Most towns lacked defensive walls. The myth, The Gifts of Inanna, reflects this period of transition where Enki, the king of the gods, grants his daughter, the goddess Inanna, the knowledge of various crafts and aspects of civilization, including the darker elements such as deceit, rebellion, and plundering. The Sumerians recognized early on that civilization brought both benefits and drawbacks. Walter Benjamin's idea that every record of civilization is also a record of barbarism is evident in the Sumerians' use of slave labor. They captured men and women from hill countries to fuel their economic growth. The birth of civilizations can be likened to the birth of stars. Just as stars form from gas clouds compacted under gravity, human settlements attract more people and grow in complexity. Around 3200 BC, the first human settlements began to flourish, marking the dawn of organized societies. The Sumerians referred to themselves as Ug-Sa-Giga, or the black-headed people, and the Acadians called them Salmat Kakadi, meaning the same. Carvings show how Sumerians wore their hair curly on top and short on the sides, with common men in sheepskin kilts and wealthier individuals in colorful wool fabrics decorated with tassels and beads. Both men and women of higher status wore copper and gold jewelry. Toynbee's stimulus and response effect suggests that environments with moderate challenges foster civilization. Too comfortable or too harsh conditions hinder societal development. The desiccation of southern Iraq drove the Sumerians to innovate and organize, leading to the first true states. According to the Sumerian king list, Eridu was the first city where the god Enki established kingship, with kings ruling for thousands of years. While historians question the accuracy of these records, they provide insight into how Sumerians viewed their history. Eridu, founded around 5400 BC, may well have been the world's first city. Around 3200 BC, the Sumerians invented writing, a transformative moment in human history. The Sumerian epic poem En-Merkar and the Lord of Arada tells of a king who, needing to send many messages, invents writing because his messenger couldn't remember them all. The king molded clay and inscribed it with symbols, marking the first instance of words on clay. The Sumerians utilized two abundant resources, clay and reeds, to create this early writing system known as cuneiform. Sumerian scribes used a lump of clay about the size of a modern smartphone and a reed stylus cut into a wedge shape. By pressing the stylus into the clay, they formed wedge-shaped symbols, creating cuneiform script. The earliest cuneiform tablets, dating back to the late Kas 4th millennium BC from the city of Uruk, were pictographic, depicting objects for clear understanding. Initially used to track rations and supplies, these pictographs gradually became more abstract due to the need for speed and efficiency. By 3000 BC, the number of symbols was reduced from around 1,500 to about 600. Eventually, the symbols represented sounds rather than whole ideas, marking the beginning of the first alphabet. This evolution meant that only an educated few could read and write, leading to the emergence of a distinct class of scribes. The ability to record knowledge allowed for significant technological advancements, marking the start of the Uruk period, named after the city of Uruk, which became the largest and most powerful city in southern Mesopotamia by the middle of the 4th millennium BC. The Uruk period is characterized by dramatic changes in pottery. Contrary to expectations, pottery from this period became less ornate and more utilitarian. The ancient pottery of the preceding Ubaid period was exceptionally beautiful, made on slow wheels and painted with geometric designs. However, during the Uruk period, the invention of the fast wheel enabled mass production of clay jars and pots in intensive workshops, prioritizing quantity over quality. During the booming economy of Sumerian cities, mass production began to take hold. In the city of Gursu, for example, 15,000 women worked in the textile industry. One factory in this era produced 1,100 tons of flour annually, as well as bread, beer, and linseed oil. This factory employed 134 specialists and 858 skilled workers, most of whom were women. With no currency, workers were compensated with food and goods. An unskilled factory worker's monthly ration included 20 liters of barley, 2 liters of oil, and 2 kilograms of wool per year. Supervisors earned roughly double this amount. However, the poor faced significant hardships, often borrowing food or silver from predatory moneylenders at interest rates as high as 30%. By 3500 BC, Uruk had grown into the largest and most powerful city in southern Mesopotamia, with a population of about 50,000. This city, founded around the same time as Eridu, became the largest city the earth had seen. The period marks significant economic advancement and urban growth, with nearly 2,000 years passing since the founding of Eridu. During this time, Sumerian civilization was already ancient, but the earliest pyramids of Egypt would not be built for another 900 years, and Stonehenge in Britain was still in its early stages. The world's earliest surviving piece of literature, the Epic of Gilgamesh, originates from Uruk. This epic tells the story of King Gilgamesh, who likely ruled in the 3rd millennium BC. Though the tale is more myth than fact, it offers insights into Sumerian society during this period. One key aspect is the increase in warfare, evidenced by the pride in Uruk's fortified walls. The epic describes the city's walls in detail, highlighting their construction with baked brick and their unmatched strength. The epic also suggests a level of urban planning in Uruk, describing the city as divided into thirds: 1/3 city, 1/3 garden, 1/3 field, and a precinct for the temple of Ishtar. At its height, Uruk covered an area of 2.5 square kilometers, reflecting advanced planning and organization by its rulers. This division indicates a structured approach to city layout, ensuring balanced development and allocation of space for various needs. In the heart of the city of Uruk, during its peak, a vibrant and bustling life unfolded. The city had a port on the river, lined with workshops and cluttered houses. At its center stood the famous White Temple, elevated 21 meters and covered in white gypsum plaster, reflecting sunlight and glowing during the day. Walking through Uruk's streets, one would encounter markets brimming with beans, lentils, pomegranates, dates, jars of date syrup, and oil. Richer areas featured houses built from baked bricks, while the rest of the city comprised mud and clay homes dried in the sun. These homes were arranged chaotically, forming a labyrinth of alleys and warrens, often covered with reed matting to keep them cool. Farmers carried large bundles of reeds and wheat, and herders brought their long-haired sheep and oxen into the city. Men gathered in shaded courtyards, sharing large jars of beer through long, hollow reed straws. Beer was the favored drink, with over 30 varieties, including white, dark, cloudy, and sweetened with honey, often flavored with herbs. A cuneiform text has preserved a drinking song, reflecting the social pleasure derived from beer. Conversations around these jars likely echoed modern-day bar talk. Sumerian proverbs reveal common concerns, such as feeling underappreciated at work or struggling with financial difficulties. At night, people slept on rooftops due to the heat inside their houses. The city emitted a pungent mixture of smells from pottery kilns, brickworks, and waste in the streets. Inside homes, people laid down layers of clay, crushed gypsum dust, and reed mats for a soft carpet-like effect. From this great metropolis, the Uruk civilization sent ripples across the world, inspiring the rise of similarly great cities. Uruk's influence marked the beginning of urban life as we know it, setting the stage for future civilizations to build upon their advancements in organization, technology, and culture. As the 4th millennium BCE drew to a close, the city of Ur began to eclipse Uruk as the cultural and economic center of Sumerian civilization. Situated where the Euphrates River met the sea, Ur was a bustling trading port and fishing town, filled with the activity of seagulls circling overhead and fishermen bringing in their catches of fish, oysters, and turtles. Its strategic location made Ur a booming hub for regional trade. Southern Iraq, with its abundant clay and reeds, was an ideal place for the Sumerians. However, they needed to import most other essentials. Fortunately, their advanced farming techniques allowed them to produce a large surplus and variety of food. Archaeological findings suggest that Mesopotamians of antiquity enjoyed a richer and more varied diet than their neighbors in Turkey or Iran. Some ancient Sumerian recipes have even been uncovered on clay tablets, such as the dish called tu'u, showcasing their culinary diversity. Boats filled with wheat, grains, dried reeds, and figs traveled up the rivers, distributing food to neighboring lands and bringing back other essential resources. Copper arrived from northwestern Iran and Cyprus, tin from Afghanistan, silver from Turkey's Taurus Mountains, and gold from Egypt and India. Ordinary wood for construction was sourced from Iran's Zagros Mountains, but the prized cedar wood for palaces and city gates came from Lebanon. The Epic of Gilgamesh even mentions a quest to obtain this valuable wood. The Sumerians engaged in what we might consider early global trade. From their Persian Gulf coasts, their ships reached trading ports in modern Bahrain and Oman, and further along the coast, they traded with the Indus Valley civilization. This trade brought spices, gemstones like carnelian, and the brilliant blue lapis lazuli, which the Sumerians used for jewelry, amulets, gaming boards, musical instruments, and stunning sculptures. This extensive trade network brought immense wealth to Ur, likely making it one of the wealthiest cities of its time. Grave goods discovered in Ur reveal the incredible wealth of its rulers and the advanced craftsmanship of its artists. One such artifact, found in a royal tomb, is a piece of furniture inlaid with a mosaic of shell, red limestone, and lapis lazuli. This exquisite piece provides a glimpse into the luxurious lives and refined tastes of the ancient Sumerians. Ur's rise to prominence marked a significant period in Sumerian history. Its wealth, cultural achievements, and extensive trade networks influenced the broader region and set the stage for future civilizations. The city's ruins continue to tell the story of a time when Sumerian culture and economy flourished, pushing the boundaries of art and architecture and shaping the course of human history. One of the most significant artifacts from Ur is the Standard of Ur, a box inlaid with detailed scenes depicting life around 4,600 years ago. On one side, it shows the Sumerians at war, with chariots pulled by donkeys, soldiers in leather capes and helmets, and men wielding spears and axes. The other side depicts a peaceful scene, with farmers and herders at work on one level, and scribes with shaved heads seated at desks above them. As the 3rd millennium BCE progressed, urbanization in the Sumerian world reached its zenith. By the end of this period, a majority of the region's population lived in cities, with Ur standing as the dominant economic power. Over the centuries, Ur's influence expanded and contracted. At one point, some of its kings even referred to themselves as the King of Ur and the King of Kish, suggesting they had subdued neighboring cities. However, by the mid-3rd millennium, Ur's influence began to wane, giving way to a more militarized age where trade and diplomacy were no longer sufficient. In this new era of violence, the city of Lagash emerged as a significant power. Known for its wealth derived from raiding villages and trading slaves, Lagash grew powerful by capturing and selling people. Around 2500 BCE, Lagash clashed with its neighbor, Umma, over disputed farmland, leading to a brutal war. A stone monument, known as the Stele of the Vultures, captures the essence of this conflict. It depicts King Eannatum of Lagash leading his soldiers into battle. The soldiers wear leather helmets and reed skirts and carry spears topped with copper or bronze blades. The stele shows Eannatum dismounting from his chariot and leading his men on foot in a tight phalanx formation. Despite being struck in the eye by an arrow, Eannatum led his army to victory. The inscription on the stele boasts of the massacre, describing how the soldiers of Umma were cut down and trampled underfoot. The stele of the vultures embodies a shift in the nature of Sumerian warfare, depicting a particular nastiness and relish in the suffering of enemies. Vultures flying overhead with severed heads in their beaks symbolize the brutality of the battle. This depiction highlights the ruthlessness of Lagash's military campaigns, which enabled it to conquer much of southern Mesopotamia and establish what some historians consider the first true empire in the world. However, the empire of Lagash was short-lived. Administering even a single city was challenging in ancient times, and Lagash's empire soon became critically overstretched. King Eannatum's rule, characterized by terror and brutality, was deeply unpopular, leading to revolts and the eventual downfall of Lagash's dominance. As the empire of Lagash fractured and collapsed, the ruler of Umma, Lugalzagezi, saw an opportunity for revenge. Motivated by a desire to avenge the defeat and humiliation his city had suffered, Lugalzagezi rose in rebellion against Lagash. He quickly toppled kings loyal to the empire in Kish and Larsa, then marched on the great cities of Ur and Uruk, both of which fell to his forces. Moving his capital to Uruk, Lugalzagezi's vengeance culminated in the sacking and burning of Lagash, an act remembered with sorrow in Sumerian poetry. Lugalzagezi's conquests didn't stop with Lagash. He worked his way north, conquering regions once claimed by Lagash. An inscription boasts that he ruled from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean coast, defeating 32 kings and smiting their cities. While this claim is likely an exaggeration, it marks the first time a Sumerian prince claimed to have conquered such vast lands. This idea of a king who might conquer all lands between the seas captivated the imaginations of future rulers. However, like Lagash before him, Lugalzagezi overstretched his resources. His empire was too large to maintain, leading to civil wars and rebellions. During this chaotic time, the Acadians, previously junior partners in Mesopotamian civilization, saw an opportunity to assert their dominance. Akkad, a prominent people in Mesopotamia, soon found a leader who would lead them in rebellion against the Sumerian Empire. This leader was Sargon, whose name means the one true king in Akkadian. Sargon's rise marked the twilight of the Sumerian age. His origin story, familiar to those brought up on biblical tales, signifies a pivotal moment in Mesopotamian history. Born in the mid-24th century BC, Sargon's origin story is steeped in legend. As a baby, he was found in a reed basket on the banks of the Tigris River, discovered by a gardener who worked in the palace of Kish. Raised as the gardener's son, Sargon, like the biblical Moses, harbored great ambitions. His charming manners and abilities soon earned him a position as a cupbearer in the palace, a role of high honor and influence. At the time, Kish was part of Lugal-Zagezi's expansive Sumerian Empire. While Lugal-Zagezi was away on a distant campaign, Sargon was entrusted with a secret mission. Given a small band of fighting men, he was tasked with launching a surprise attack on the city of Uruk, where Lugal-Zagezi kept his royal court. The plan was audacious, aiming to liberate Kish from imperial control by striking the heart of the empire. With much of Lugal-Zagezi's army away, Sargon's forces overcame Uruk's defenses and captured the city. They symbolically broke down sections of Uruk's famous city walls, a direct affront to Lugal-Zagezi's might. Enraged, Lugal-Zagezi gathered his subject kings and their armies, possibly as many as 50, to crush the insurgent forces. Despite the overwhelming odds, Sargon demonstrated his military genius, turning the battle in his favor. His army emerged victorious, and Lugal-Zagezi was captured. Sargon humiliated the defeated king by marching him through the gates of Nippur wearing a neckstock. Yet, in a remarkable act of mercy, Sargon allowed Lugal-Zagezi to live and continue as the governor of Uruk, provided he swore allegiance to Sargon. Sargon founded a new city, Akkad, as the capital of his empire. From Akkad, he would go on to conquer territories once held by previous empires. An inscription beneath a statue in the city of Nippur claims his expansive rule, marking the beginning of the Acadian Empire and the twilight of the Sumerian age. Sargon's leadership and military prowess would leave an indelible mark on Mesopotamian history. Sargon, the king of Kish, is celebrated for his extensive military campaigns, reportedly triumphing in 34 battles and expanding his dominion to the edges of the sea. His strategy involved not only conquering cities, but also dismantling their defensive walls to prevent future rebellions. To symbolize his mastery over the land, Sargon conducted a ceremonial washing of his weapons in the waters of both the Persian Gulf and the Mediterranean Sea. Beyond his military successes, Sargon worked to centralize the administration of his empire. He reformed the dating system and made efforts to strengthen the central state, increasing the stability of his rule. His reign marked a significant shift in Mesopotamian history as Akkadian began to replace Sumerian in official inscriptions. This change was part of Sargon's broader strategy to promote Akkadian nationalism, appointing fellow Akkadians to key government positions and stationing Akkadian troops in Sumerian cities to ensure loyalty. Despite his efforts, Sargon's policies led to growing resentment in the southern Sumerian-speaking cities. Although Sargon's military prowess kept the empire intact during his lifetime, by the end of his 55-year reign, widespread revolts had erupted. A later Babylonian text recounts that in his old age, all the lands revolted against him, besieging him in the city of Akkad. However, Sargon managed to defeat them one last time. After Sargon's death around 22 84 BC, his sons Rimush and Manishtushu inherited a fractured empire. Rimush spent 9 years reconquering rebellious Sumerian cities, with 1 year notably known as the year that Adab was destroyed. Following Rimush's death, Manishtushu ruled and resorted to terror tactics, reminiscent of the hated kings of Lagash. It was Sargon's grandson, Naram-Sin, who restored the empire's former glory. Naram-Sin managed to quell the southern rebellions and stabilize the empire. Unlike his predecessors, he sought to reconcile the Sumerians and Acadians, adopting the more inclusive title King of Sumer and Akkad. Despite these efforts, the cultural rift continued to grow. By this time, Akkadian had become the dominant spoken language, partly due to official policies that discouraged the use of Sumerian in official documents. This shift marked the gradual decline of Sumerian cultural influence in the region. As the Acadian Empire became more cosmopolitan, the Sumerian language, a unique language isolate, began to fade. In contrast, Akkadian was part of the Semitic language family, sharing similarities with the languages spoken in surrounding regions. This made Akkadian easier to learn for neighboring peoples, akin to an English speaker learning French or Spanish, compared to the more complex task of learning Sumerian, which would be like learning Korean. Over time, Akkadian became the language of trade and commerce, and fewer people needed to learn Sumerian. Despite its linguistic dominance, the Acadian Empire faced its own decline. After the death of the great Acadian king Naram-Sin, his son Shar-Kali-Shari ascended to the throne. 4 years into his reign, a great celestial event occurred around 2213 BC, the passing of the comet Hale-Bopp. This comet, a giant ball of ice and dust 40 kilometers across, would have appeared as a bright streak of light in the sky, remaining visible for 18 months. The sight of Hale-Bopp would have been awe-inspiring for the people of Mesopotamia. Some might have seen it as a blessing, while others might have viewed it as an ominous sign. The latter proved correct, as during Shar-Kali-Shari's reign, the world experienced a sudden and mysterious climate shift known as the Ur 4.2 kilo year event. This event, possibly linked to changes in North Atlantic sea ice, caused global climatic disruptions. In Mesopotamia, annual rainfall dropped dramatically, leading to a much more arid climate. The crucial annual floods of the rivers, essential for agriculture, failed regularly, resulting in prolonged famines. This dry period lasted well over a century, and possibly up to 300 years. Its effects were felt globally, contributing to the collapse of several ancient civilizations, including Egypt's Old Kingdom, the Indus Valley Civilization, and the Liangzhu culture in China. Even as the Acadian Empire declined, the Sumerians had one last opportunity to leave their mark on history. The climate crisis and subsequent famines weakened the Acadian Empire, setting the stage for the Sumerians to reclaim their historical significance, albeit briefly, before fading into history themselves. Around the time of the 4.2 kilo year event, Mesopotamia, still under the Acadian Empire, experienced a dramatic shift as resources became scarce. The days of abundant food surpluses ended, leading to the abandonment of towns and cities in the northern drier zones. After the death of King Shar-Kali-Shari around 2193 BC, chaos and bitter civil war engulfed the empire of Akkad. The Sumerian king list, with a hint of sarcasm, records this tumultuous period. Then, who was king? Who was not the king? 4 of them ruled in only 3 years. Amidst this chaos, the Guti, a nomadic tribal people from the mountains overlooking Mesopotamia, saw an opportunity. Little is known about the Guti, what language they spoke, or which gods they worshipped. Ancient Sumerian texts depict them with particular disdain, describing them as an unhappy, irreligious people. The Guti had long raided the Acadian Empire's borders, burning villages and stealing cattle. A letter from King Shar-Kali-Shari's reign, written by an Acadian lord with land near Guti territory, reveals the persistent threat they posed. He urged his workers to continue cultivating fields and guarding cattle despite the Guti raids, emphasizing that failure to do so would result in no compensation. During the drought and internal strife, the Guti decided to invade Sumer rather than merely raid it. A literary text from a few centuries later, the Curse of Akkad, dramatizes these events. In the story, the god Enlil punishes the king of Akkad by summoning the Guti, depicted as monstrous, half-animal creatures whose language sounded like dog barks. The Guti used hit-and-run tactics, raiding supply lines and leaving scorched earth behind, which devastated the Acadian economy. The drought-ridden and war-torn society crumbled. Agricultural production plummeted, grain fields, fish-filled waters, and irrigated orchards failed to yield their usual bounty, leading to widespread famine and economic collapse. As the Acadian society weakened under drought, famine, and internal strife, the Gutian invasion proved devastating. The gathered clouds did not rain, and plants did not grow, causing severe famine. People were dying from hunger, and even those who perished at home had no proper burial. The demoralized Acadian army was defeated in battle, and the Guti swept down on the city of Akkad, burning it to the ground. The city of Sargon was so thoroughly destroyed that its ruins have never been found. The Guti attempted to establish their own dynasty over the lands of Sumer, but faced significant challenges. Their administration showed little concern for maintaining agriculture, written records, or public safety. Being illiterate, the Guti struggled to manage an empire that had long relied on written records. They also released livestock to roam freely, exacerbating the famine and causing a spike in grain prices. Infrastructure deteriorated, with roads becoming overgrown and towpaths impassable. With the central authority of the Acadian Empire destroyed, several Sumerian city-states reasserted their independence. The Guti, weakened by their failed attempt to hold the empire together, were unable to stop them. This period, known as the Gutian period, lasted over 150 years and was marked by suffering and a decline in written records. As resentment towards the Guti grew, rebellions rose throughout the country. A Sumerian man named Utu-Hengal saw an opportunity in this crisis. Believed to be the governor of Uruk during the final years of the Gutian period, Utu-Hengal witnessed the famine ravaging his people and the Guti's brutal suppression of any resistance. With the ascension of a new Guti king to the throne of Sumer and Akkad, Utu-Hengal was poised to lead a rebellion to restore Sumerian rule. The Guti king, Tirigan, known for his harsh policies and neglect of infrastructure, ruled for only 40 days. During his brief reign, he blocked water from fields in Sumer and closed off roads in the uplands, leading to overgrown highways and a further decline in agricultural productivity. Tirigan's oppressive actions and the already dire conditions provided the perfect opportunity for Utu-Hengal, the governor of Uruk, to lead a rebellion. Utu-Hengal's rebellion seems to have been meticulously planned. He possibly sent secret envoys to other Sumerian cities, urging them to prepare for war. When Tirigan ascended to the throne, Utu-Hengal struck. Tirigan, enraged but not brave, sent his generals Ur and Uruk and Nabi-Enlil to lead his armies while he stayed in his palace. Utu Hengal, after making offerings to the storm god Iskur, met the Guti generals in battle. Utu Hengal captured the Guti generals and secured victory. Upon hearing of his general's defeat, Tirigan fled north to Dabrum, thinking himself safe. However, the people of Deborum, recognizing Utu Hengal's power, refused to shelter Tirigan. Utu Hengal's envoy arrested Tirigan, his wife, and children, bringing an end to Guti rule. With Tirigan's capture, the Sumerians rejected both Guti and Acadian rule, and Utu Hengal restored the kingship of Sumer. His rebellion marked the beginning of the third dynasty of Ur, also known as the Neo-Sumerian Empire or the Sumerian Renaissance. This period was a final flourishing of Sumerian culture, leaving a lasting impact on history. Despite his success, Utu Hengal ruled for only 7 years. He died under suspicious circumstances, swept away in a flood while inspecting a river dam. Some historians suspect foul play, possibly orchestrated by Ur-Nammu, one of Utu Hengal's ambitious governors. Regardless of the circumstances of his rise to power, Ur-Nammu proved to be an effective ruler and an outstanding administrator. His reign continued the legacy of the Sumerian Renaissance, ensuring the cultural and political influence of Sumer would endure. Ur-Nammu was an influential ruler whose administrative and legal reforms left a significant mark on Sumerian society. He standardized bronze weights used in markets, laying the groundwork for the first currencies by creating a unit of silver called the mina, composed of 60 shekels. Ur-Nammu also compiled a code of laws, predating the famous Code of Hammurabi by 3 centuries. Here are a few examples. Ur-Nammu was a prolific builder, contributing to the construction and restoration of cities, roads, and irrigation systems across his kingdom. Notable cities where he built include Nippur, Larsa, Kish, Adab, and Umma. After decades of neglect under Guti rule, he rebuilt vital infrastructure. Ur-Nammu's most renowned constructions were the ziggurats, the distinctive stepped towers that became hallmarks of Sumerian architecture. Each ziggurat rose in 3 layers, painted with white gypsum, and possibly adorned with plants and trees on the terraces. The most magnificent ziggurat built by Ur-Nammu was in his home city of Ur. This massive structure, made from baked clay bricks and bitumen, would have been visible from up to 20 kilometers away and symbolized the city's power and the god's presence. Despite the late cultural flourishing under Ur-Nammu, the Sumerians faced a severe agricultural decline due to soil salinity. The irrigation methods used for centuries led to salt buildup in the soil, as the Tigris and Euphrates rivers carried salts and minerals. In the arid climate of Iraq, these salts were not washed away by rainfall, resulting in reduced crop yields. Meticulous records by Sumerian scribes show a steady decrease in wheat production, while barley, more resistant to salty soil, remained relatively stable. By 3550 BC, wheat and barley were produced equally, but after a millennium of irrigation, wheat constituted only 1/6 of the crop. By the 21st century BC, wheat constituted less than 2% of the annual harvest, signaling a dramatic increase in soil salinity. The Sumerians, often unfairly labeled as ignorant or greedy for their agricultural practices, were actually quite aware of the need to rest soil and implemented several adaptive strategies. They shifted to barley, which is more tolerant to salt, and developed methods to drain the soil, aiming to mitigate salination. Despite these efforts, The cumulative effects of irrigation and evaporation led to a gradual but inevitable decline in soil fertility. Modern-day Iraq still grapples with soil salinity, highlighting the persistent nature of this agricultural challenge. The increasing demands on the farmland, driven by a growing population and prolonged drought, further exacerbated the situation. Eventually, a thick layer of salt encrusted the topsoil, rendering it almost barren. Today, the desert soil in parts of Iraq exhibits a crumbly crust, reminiscent of the salt that once choked the life out of Sumerian agriculture. The decline in agricultural productivity coincided with renewed threats from outside forces. Although the Guti had retreated to their nomadic lifestyle in the mountains, they continued to raid Sumerian lands. Ur spent much of his reign combating these threats, raising an army to confront the Guti in their territory. However, he met his end in the mountains, possibly due to an ambush, which marked the beginning of the final decline of Sumerian civilization. Ur death was commemorated in an epic poem, The Death of Ur, which describes his descent into the underworld and his final lament about never seeing the beautiful bricks of Ur again. Following Ur, 4 Sumerian kings, including Shulgi, attempted to maintain stability through military and economic reforms. Despite some successes, they faced relentless threats from various nomadic tribes, including the Martu, a Semitic people from the mountains of Syria and Lebanon. The Martu, described in stark, almost dehumanizing terms by the Sumerians, were a nomadic people from Syria. Environmental pressures and a prolonged drought pushed them south into the fertile river valleys of Sumer. Despite the weakened state of the Sumerian Empire, the later kings were determined to halt these incursions. King Shusin's ambitious construction of the 300-kilometer-long Martu Wall, an earthwork rampart likely dotted with forts and possibly fronted by a canal-fed moat, exemplified this effort. The wall turned the farmland between the Tigris and Euphrates into a fortress. However, without a constant garrison, the wall proved ineffective, highlighting the empire's diminishing power. Ibisin, the last Sumerian king, ascended the throne in 2028 BC, only to witness the rapid disintegration of his empire. Key cities like Ashuna and Susa rebelled early in his reign. The Elamites, an emerging power, further eroded Sumerian control. By the 5th year of Ibisin's reign, the Martu Wall had failed, allowing the Martu to overrun the rich farmlands, leading to immediate and severe food shortages. In years 7 and 8 of Ibisin's rule, the price of grain soared 60 times above normal, causing widespread starvation, particularly in Ur. In a desperate bid to secure food, Ibisin dispatched one of his generals, Ishbi-Era, to the city of Isin to buy grain at exorbitant prices. However, Ishbi-Era was not among the king's most trusted generals, indicating a lack of cohesive leadership during this crisis. In a telling letter from the general Ishbi-Era to King Ibisin, we glimpse the dire state of Sumerian society. The general, tasked with buying grain, reports back from Isin, revealing that the Martu have overrun Sumerian territories. Ishbi-Era's letter shows the chaos and helplessness gripping the kingdom as he requests 600 boats to transport grain and offers to defend Isin. However, Ishbi-Era's real intentions become clear as he declares himself king of Isin, withholding the much-needed grain from Ur. Facing threats from all sides, Ibisin's efforts to fortify Ur and Nippur proved futile. The Sumerian Empire crumbled city by city until only Ur remained. The Elamites, former subjects from the Iranian foothills, gathered an army and laid siege to Ur. In desperation, Ibisin sought help from the Martu, and even the treacherous Ishbi era, but his pleas went unanswered. The Elamites broke through Ur's defenses, setting the city ablaze, looting its treasures, and capturing Ibisin, who was taken in chains to Elam, where he eventually died. The destruction of Ur marked the end of Sumerian civilization. The ancient Sumerians expressed their grief through poetry, with laments written for each ruined city. The lament for Ur poignantly captures the despair of the time. The gods have abandoned us. Like migrating birds, they have gone. Ur is destroyed. Bitter is its lament. The country's blood now fills its holes like hot bronze in a mold. Bodies dissolve like fat in the sun. Our temple is destroyed. The fall of Ur marked a significant turning point in ancient history, bringing the unified Sumerian state to an end and plunging the region into a dark age where city-states once again battled for dominance. The wars of this period reduced Sumerian cities to blackened ruins. The once vibrant streets and fields where dancers once celebrated were now littered with the dead and broken pottery. The walls and gates lay in ruins, and the drought continued to ravage the land, leaving the salt-ridden fields barren and unable to produce enough barley. This dire situation led to a mass exodus from the region. Sumerians fled the south of Mesopotamia, becoming refugees who carried their belongings and wept for their lost homeland. Over centuries, a significant population movement took place. Some Sumerians settled in Acadian lands, gradually losing their cultural identity and adopting the Acadian language. Meanwhile, the Martu, initially despised hill people, settled in the conquered river valley cities. This migration led to a blending of cultures between the Martu, the fleeing Sumerians, and the native Acadians, setting the foundation for the next great civilizations of Mesopotamia, Babylon, and Assyria. The Sumerian language ceased to be spoken in the streets and markets, but remained in use for another 2,000 years in temples and scriptures, similar to how Latin persisted in medieval European churches. For later Mesopotamian civilizations, Sumerian became the sacred language of the gods, myth, and magic. The kings of Babylon and Assyria ruled under titles that connected them to the ancient Sumerian rulers, giving them a sense of legitimacy and continuity with the dawn of civilization. Despite the fall of the Sumerian Empire, many of its cities, including the coastal city of Ur, continued to thrive in the post-Sumerian era. Ur experienced multiple rises and falls throughout its history, but the landscape that once nurtured it eventually led to its demise. Today, standing in the ruins of Ur, one can find remnants of millions of seashells, evidence of the ancient coastline. Over millennia, silt deposits and changing sea levels pushed Iraq's Gulf Coast approximately 150 kilometers south of Ur's original location. The Euphrates River, which once brought trade and prosperity to Ur, has since changed its course, leaving the ancient city surrounded by nothing but barren desert. The loss of the river and the sea led to Ur's gradual decline. As water sources dried up, the city's inhabitants abandoned their homes, fields, and irrigation canals. The great ziggurat's fires were extinguished, and offerings to the moon god Sin ceased. Markets closed, and the city's mud brick buildings crumbled. Wooden beams rotted, and desert winds buried the ruins under sand dunes. The desolation of Ur became legendary, with occasional travelers like the Italian Pietro della Valle discovering remnants of the once great city. Among these ruins were clay tablets inscribed with laments for the city's destruction. One such lament mourns, "May that storm swoop down no more on your city. May the door be closed on it like the great city gate at nighttime. Until distant days, other days, future days, in your city reduced to ruin mounds, may a lament be made to you. O Nana, may your restored city be resplendent before you. Following Ur's sacking around 2000 BC, Uruk also fell into decline, its population fleeing. Though Uruk experienced a revival under the Assyrian Empire, it was ultimately abandoned as the Euphrates River shifted. The walls of Uruk, celebrated in the Epic of Gilgamesh, remain visible today, towering over the desert landscape. English archaeologist William Loftus, the first European to rediscover Uruk, described it as the most desolate sight he had ever seen. The decay of Sumerian cities like Nippur, Eridu, Lagash, Ur, and Uruk was gradual but inevitable. Windborne sand and earth accumulated against the standing walls, filling streets, while rain and wind wore down remaining structures. These ruins, encountered by travelers such as Della Valle, inspired awe and stories about the fate of their builders. Tales like the Tower of Babel echo the pride and downfall of these ancient people. The civilizations that followed the Sumerians, preserving their language in temples and stories of their kings, eventually met their own ruin. The ability to read Sumerian was lost, and its history faded into obscurity. Yet, the clay tablets they left behind remained, buried in Iraq's sands. These tablets, rediscovered by archaeologists, provide glimpses into the lives of the Sumerian people, recording their daily activities, music, prayers, and laments for their lost cities. These ancient texts shed light on the Sumerians' philosophies and emotions. The Epic of Gilgamesh offers profound reflections on mortality. Nobody sees death, nobody sees the face of death, nobody hears the voice of death. Savage death just cuts mankind down. Sometimes we build a house, sometimes we make a nest, but then brothers divide it upon inheritance. Sometimes there is hostility in the land, but then the river rises and brings floodwater. Dragonflies drift on the river, their faces look upon the face of the sun, but then suddenly there is nothing. By 1700 BC, the Sumerian kings were distant memories, and far away, the last woolly mammoth lay down to die. Sumerian society had risen, thrived, and fallen, its imperial form outlived by an ancient species. Reflecting on this era, the Epic of Gilgamesh narrates a poignant scene. Gilgamesh weeps over his dying friend, who dreams of the afterlife, a place where all kings live in darkness, their crowns put away forever. To fully grasp the Sumerian experience, envision living in Ur or Uruk as their civilization declined. Crops weakened each year, salt crusted the soil, and hunger plagued the streets. Armies of mountain people gathered on the horizon, forcing residents to flee with their belongings. The city's priests continued their chants in the ziggurat's tower, even as the sun set over the desert. In a passage from the Epic of Gilgamesh, the hero recounts a dream to his friend. "Listen, my friend, this is the dream I dreamed last night. I stood before an awful being, the somber-faced man-bird. He turned his stare towards me, and he led me away to the palace of Irkalla, the queen of darkness, to the house from which none who enters ever returns, down the road from which there is no coming back." This evocative imagery captures the melancholy and timeless struggle with loss, embodying the spirit of a civilization that once thrived and ultimately vanished into the sands of time.